Great. Hi, everyone. If you don't know me, my name is Alper. I'm the Education Content Manager for this year's CodeDay Labs. I'm happy to welcome Hanjoon and Sarah, who are both employees of Empowerly, which is a college counseling service. So if you guys would like to introduce yourselves a little more, that would be great.
Absolutely. Hanjun, if you want to go ahead and go first.
Sure. So hi, my name is Hanjoon. Let's see. I went to Stanford for Econ and CS. Oh, someone can't see the same screen share.
Oh, no, I'm doing that. Thanks.
Can anyone else see it?
I see it.
I see it too.
Yeah, I see a screen share.
Maybe try to join and. Okay, now it's good.
Cool.
All right, cool.
Cool.
All right.
Yeah, I guess I grew up in Arizona. I went so born in Korea, grew up in Arizona, went to high school in Arizona. I played sports. I was also a musician, and I did a lot of academic competitions. Outside of that, after graduating, I've been working as a software engineer here at Empowerly, and I'm happy to talk about that at length later on as well.
Yeah, and I'm Sarah. I'm just a moderator here today, but I actually went across the pond. I went to UC Berkeley, Stanford's arch enemy. And I originally studied bioengineering at Cal. I studied that for 2 years, but then I took a couple years off and worked in education in China. And when I went back to school, I decided to take a totally different turn and study legal studies and Chinese instead. And I've been with Empowerly for a couple of years in the growth team and as a college counselor. So although I myself am no longer a STEM student, definitely worked with a ton of students in that field. So very excited to be here. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, just how we're structuring this. We'll spend a little bit of the first half talking about Hanjun's background. I'll just ask him a few questions, and then we'll open it up to you guys and talk about whatever it is that you guys want to talk about and what would be helpful for you, because it's definitely a great resource to actually talk to Hanjun and see what his life is like as a software engineer and what would have been helpful for him to know when he was in high school, thinking about what he wanted to do in the future. So yeah, if you guys can actually, it would help us know Taylor a lot if we knew who you guys were. So if you want to
please
go ahead and throw in the chat. Yeah,
please type in. Don't be shy. Just type in your age, like where you're from. Just that would help a lot.
And feel free to do it anonymously to us if that's something that you're concerned about. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Hanjun, my first question to you is actually pretty basic. Love to hear just more about you. How did you actually come to study econ and CS at Stanford?
Those two were kind of just like naturally things that I was always interested in. So I think coming in, I mean, a lot of students come into to college not exactly knowing what they want to major in. But for me, it was like pretty clear. It was like after the first few classes, I was like, all right, this is exactly what I thought it would be. That's what I'm going to do.
And I mean, how did you choose Stanford, or how did you choose those? Did you know that you wanted to study those majors before you even applied?
I kind of did, yeah. I think a lot of it kind of came from my AP courses. So I took AP Econ and AP CS, and those two are definitely some of my favorite classes just from high school. I did a lot of math in high school, but then I think as the math got more and more abstract, it didn't draw me as much. It was like less practical in the real world and a lot more theory. And I think that didn't draw me as much. I think I was kind of like an engineer at heart, where I want something to be applicable in the real world.
Yeah, totally. Well, actually, let's talk a little bit about your experiences at Stanford, and you talked a little bit about how, as you went on with math, you didn't find it as applicable. But I mean, what were your favorite classes, or your least favorite, and what was it like at Stanford?
My favorite classes at Stanford. That's tough. I think the cool part about Stanford was that it's, in the heart of Silicon Valley. So I had this, it's like a random class. It's like a class for consultants, actually. Like completely like not what I'm doing right now. But this teacher was like well connected, and he would bring in, his connections to class like one every week. So I got to meet like the CEO of Stripe, Patrick Collison. I got to meet Pete Docter, the head of Pixar. He brought the Oscar that he won that year for Inside Out. Absolutely crazy stuff. Some really cool people that came into the class every week, with like a classroom filled with like 15 students, and we just got to kind of pick their brains, and that was
Wow.
that was a fantastic class.
Wow.
How did I spend my free time? I played a lot of tennis. Played tennis. I played a lot of basketball. Started going to the gym. Hung out with friends. What else? That's kind of it.
I
We
have
stayed
a
on campus.
question as
Yeah.
a former UC Berkeley engineer. We used to not really jokingly joke that Stanford engineers just have all of the free time in the world because you guys actually have a balance in social life. I mean, is that true?
So I do know that Berkeley EECS is very notorious for being a very tough course load. I think for Stanford, it really depends on yourself. You can kind of choose to have a heavier workload if you want to, or you can choose to take a lighter quarter. And definitely during the lighter quarters, it's definitely possible to take it easy. But there's students taking more than the like the minimum legal limit of units that you can take. You have to appeal for it, and you'd be surprised. I mean, I guess it makes sense. It's like Stanford students, but a bunch of students were taking more than the units allowed, and going very hard.
Absolutely. Well, okay, glad to know that stereotype isn't totally true. I mean, how was studying at Stanford? I mean, what were your expectations going into Stanford? And then how did that change, or if they changed?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the reason I didn't go to East Coast, like I didn't go to an Ivy, is I thought it would be like too intense, and I'm like a pretty like laid back guy. I was pretty intense in high school, but I think my natural personality is to be a little bit more laid back. So I think West Coast kind of suited me a little bit more. So I was expecting it to be like pretty intense still, because it's like a top school. But and I think that was kind of the case. Like there's definitely some students who are like really intense about it, like kind of talking about classes all the time, or like just studying a lot. But you can meet people who are or like studying is like kind of like a secondary aspect of school, and the first part is like making friends, making connections, which I appreciated.
Nice. Well, let's talk a little bit about before you got to Stanford, because I did notice in the chat, and thanks for you guys who sent that in. Looks like we have a couple of juniors. So I'm not sure if you guys are rising juniors or if you're rising seniors, but this is definitely on your horizon, the very soon coming horizon. Hanjoon, can you talk to us a little bit about what your college application process was like?
Yeah. So just the application wise, I think it's very important if you're aiming for top schools to pick the proper school to apply to early. So top schools do early action, which is not binding. But having that early acceptance from a school can be a life changer. And for example, for me, I was thankfully able to get into Stanford early. So because I got into Stanford early, by December, I already knew that I have one school that I will be happy to go to. So I only had to apply to 4 other schools. It was just the HIPSM, the top 5, and that just made my application process a lot easier. So that's one thing that I would definitely be like wary of. Like you want to make sure you get that early application in, and that it's very good.
So, I mean, related to that, I mean, if you applied, I assume, did you apply REA for Stanford, Restricted
Yes.
Early Action?
Yes.
When did you actually get started on your college application then?
So, man, it's been almost 10 years, I think. Yeah. But I think, right when the Common App came out, because I think Stanford was on Common App, and it's just still should be, I think, with like a supplement.
Right.
But yeah, when it came out, just started looking at the questions, started filling it out, and the essays, the brainstorming, I started working on it before the apps even came out, like over the summer. And to be honest, like the essay questions, you should be kind of brainstorming like a couple of years back, like maybe even junior year. You're like, hey, what's my passion? You know, what does my application, like what's the strong points of my application? How can I tie that into making like a very interesting essay that's, you know, very relatable and funny to the officer.
Absolutely. And then, last question on that slide of just like, what was the highlight of the process for you? And was there anything that was particularly frustrating or difficult for you?
I mean, definitely getting into the schools that I got into were definitely highlights. I think getting to Stanford that early, at first, the decision was, yeah, it's crazy. I opened my phone in the cafeteria at my school. I have like a bunch of people around me. You know, I open it and I see that I got in, and I just start crying. And I didn't really think that I would, you know, cry. But I think it was something that I was kind of working for, you know, my entire life. You know, with my parents, like moving to America, you know, it's like the big American dream. So when I got it, I started crying. Like I like run to the bathroom. Like I was calling my dad, and he thought later on, he told me that he thought that I got into a car accident because, you know, I'm like calling on the phone. And I'm like, dad, like, and it's like I got in, and then he started crying as well. And you know, that's probably one of the highlights of my life, honestly.
Wow. Awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about, looks like we have mainly juniors in here, but, this is being recorded, so I do think this will be super helpful for the other students at CodeDay Labs. What were kind of the stuff that you think helped you get into Stanford, right? Coming from the perspective of a, ninth or 10th grader, right? You mentioned that you're really a math kid. We talked a little bit about some of the extracurriculars that you've done, but from your experience, what are the things that an underclassman should be taking into consideration if their goal is STEM or CS at Stanford?
Well, so I definitely didn't apply. Well, so for the top schools, you don't really apply for a major. You just apply as general application. So there's this question of like, oh, should I be like too STEM focused? Is that too stereotypical? That's like a different discussion altogether. But I would mostly say like pursue like what you're passionate and good at, and kind of revolve your application around that. I think for me, like early on, I recognized that, you know, it takes a lot of, you know, effort and luck to get into these top schools. So I just kind of want to maximize my chances, like however I could do it. And I knew I'm like, I probably wasn't going to get like international accolades, you know, like I have confidence in myself, but you know, it's very tough to be at that, like that upper echelon of, you know, the world. So I was like, okay, what I'm going to do is kind of make sure that my application is bulletproof. You know, I might not be like top 10, you know, in math in the world, but I can show that I am very, very good at math while still being able to handle everything else on my plate. So for me, that included being an athlete, being a musician, competing in science bowl, quiz bowl, you know, state level, national level. What else? Making sure I have leadership roles in any clubs that I did partake in. And then after that, just making sure my academics were as perfect as possible. So making sure I took the hardest courses I could and making sure I got the best grades in all of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that kind of sums it up.
And a lot of the students that I work with, a large thing we focus on and a lot of questions that parents have is, what summer programs should we be doing for research, or, how do I get an internship? And, oh, I'm interested in studying CS, but this internship is not, it's not a CS internship. It's not technical. From your perspective, looking at your peers at Stanford, I mean, how important was are extracurriculars like summer research programs or internships?
Yeah, it's super important. I would say for the people who haven't done as much research on the college admissions process, I think it's becoming a bit more well known now. But back then, it wasn't as common knowledge. But like what you do in the summer is like an edge that you need to have if you're trying to get into the top colleges. It's kind of like maybe a little sad that like it has come to this where like high school students, when you're like super young, you have to like sacrifice your summers, not sacrifice, but you have to like work hard over the summers as well. But that is kind of the truth, I think. You have to make sure you're using your summers as wisely as possible. There's certain summer programs that have a level of prestige around them, and that if you're able to get into them early, your chances of making it into a top school is exponentially greater. So yeah, summer you should be focusing on getting into a certain summer program like in your area of expertise, or you should be trying to get either research opportunities or internship opportunities. Something. I don't know if like there's like a ranking between like what I mean. There's a ranking for like summer programs, but depending on which summer program it is, like having an internship might be better if you're like focused around CS.
On that point, sorry to intercede, but CodeDay Labs is actually an excellent example of this because it's like a professional internship over the summer, and they get to interact with mentors from different fields of tech and CS. So I think it's an excellent example.
I agree.
Absolutely. And kind of on that note of, talking to mentors and maximizing your summer, Hanjoon, you mentioned earlier that it's not as important to necessarily choose your major when you're applying to top schools because, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, none of them actually require you to choose a major, right? You just are accepted into a general applicant pool. But you did mention that it's super important to figure out what your passion is and go for that. Can you talk a little bit about, how you developed that for yourself in high school?
Yeah, I would say a lot of it was like introspective thinking, and it's not like I stumbled on that myself. It was mostly my parents being like, hey, you should think about what you want to be in the future, and they're like, you should think about it. And they would constantly ask me, and I'm very appreciative. And I think at a very young age I was like, oh, I want to be an inventor. I really like the show Jimmy Neutron. So I was like, oh, I think inventing things would be really cool. Like making things that help people around the world. I think that's like that's an admirable and like cool career. So I was thinking some sort of like engineering. And then I came into like, I was able to kind of skip a few math courses early on in high school. So I was able to kind of explore the math side. Thankfully, like I was good at it. So like, it was like interesting and fun. But I was able to explore it to the point where I'm like, okay, I don't want to do this as like a career. So it kind of narrowed it down to like, okay, maybe making something. And then I think software ended up being that you're making something. It's not like an actual physical thing, but you are technically inventing things as you go. So I think that's kind of like where it kind of came down to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of just want to highlight that because that's the advice that I often give to my students, that you can have a passion that starts out very introspectively, right? Of like, oh, some ideas that my parents had or that I have on my own, but you can't really know what your passion is until you actually do something related to it, right? And get involved with it. And so that's why it's just so important to find extracurriculars and programs that are really related to that, and talk to people like Hanjoon or like the mentors at CodeDay Labs who can give you advice on that. But awesome. And then last question before we open it up to AMA. But for rising seniors, people who are actually about to apply, do you have any tips for them?
For rising high school seniors.
Yes.
So rising high school junior, rising high school seniors. At this point, I think you kind of have to be brainstorming your essays, and you have to make sure your essays are very, very good. They should go through several iterations. First, like kind of have an idea of like what you're passionate about, what your application revolves around, write the essay. And then once you're happy with it, start showing people that you're close to who happen to be good writers, ask for their opinions, and then you're gonna have to rewrite it a couple of times until it's really polished. So make sure the essays, you get started on that early. Those take a while. Like those take a long time to make a really good essay. Start those early. As a senior, I think, it's kind of make sure you get your applications done. Make sure you don't wait till the last minute. My sister did that. It freaked my dad out. Don't do that. Yeah, I think as a senior, you kind of have to kind of just tie everything that you have together and make sure that you're presenting yourself in the best way possible.
Absolutely. And you know, I mean, I'm always getting on my students' case about, like, you know, the latest that you have to start on your essays is when the prompt gets released, the official
Yep.
prompt, right?
Yep. Agreed.
But actually, a lot of us get started in the months before that because, you know, the questions are going to be largely the same from year to
That's the
year.
previous year, yeah.
I mean, Hanjoon, can you talk a little bit about what your personal experience was writing your essays? I mean, how many did you write? Was there a particular topic that you struggled with? Anything like that?
Yeah. So I started on mine definitely very early, like in the summer. I was already preparing my main Common App essay, and it went through a bunch of iterations, whether it was like topics or like some kind of yeah, like what I wanted the story or point to be, like how I wanted to display myself. And I think after like going through several revisions, I came onto like a topic. It wasn't really about a passion of mine, but it was kind of like a thought I had, and a lot of it. So the essay revolved around living in the same room as my cousin. So my cousin grew up with me during my high school and his middle school days. And I talked about how, you know, at first it negatively impacted my life, because, you know, you have a roommate. I can't stay up late. If I play video games, if I slack off, like he'll start doing the same things. And as they kind of came together saying like, you know, at first I hated this, you know, like living with my cousin. But by the end, I kind of learned that helped me grow to be a better person, because I realized that, hey, like this younger guy is like kind of, you know, mimicking what I do, and it's kind of following my footsteps. And amusingly enough, my cousin actually ended up going to Stanford as well. So he graduated 2 years ago, I think.
Wow.
And now he's doing a PhD in math. So he he definitely yeah. It's funny how things turn out.
Wow, awesome. Well, that's most of the questions I have, and I have a ton more questions prepared for all of the underclassmen who weren't able to join us today. But I actually, at this point, love to open it up to the few of us in the room. If you guys have any specific questions, you know, feel free to raise your hand, and we can have you guys actually speak up. But, you know, we're curious about, you know, where are you guys studying, where you're planning on applying to, if you guys have any particular questions about what it's like to be a software engineer. I'll go ahead and ask the first question to you, Hanjoon, that we have, and thank you for this question. The question is, how many colleges should I apply to in terms of, and you know, balancing with safety, target, reach, far reach?
Yeah. Okay, cool. So first question. Before I say that, for seniors, make sure your grades, I just kind of thought about it, but make sure you keep your grades up, because they ask for it for your first semester grades. And even after you get in, some schools will ask for your second semester grades. And if they drop too much, they'll actually rescind the offer. So make sure you don't slack off too much senior year. Back to the question. How many colleges should I apply to? So this is depends on whether you get into a school for your early action. Basically, if you're into early action, and it's a school that you're happy going to, then you don't have to apply that many colleges. If we're assuming that you're not getting into early action, or like you didn't get in, then you should be preparing to apply to at least 10 colleges, I would say. At least 10. More if you want, kind of depending on what level of colleges you're applying to. For safety, I would do like one or two at most. But yeah, it really depends on the applicant. But I guess a general answer would be at least 10.
Absolutely. Great. So thank you for your question. And we have a couple of questions kind of related to college counseling, which I'll give my 2 cents on as a growth lead at Empowerly, and Hanjoon, feel free to chip in. But we have one question that's kind of asking about, a lot of college counselors promote this idea of like a certain style of applying to a college, which has to do with creating a passion project, and it feels really fake and it doesn't necessarily guarantee you admission. And what our take is about that. And Hanjin, I don't know if you've seen this with your peers. I will say, as a college counselor, I've actually worked with, probably at this point, 400 students since I've gotten started in the last 5 years. And in Empowerly, we actually have 80 college counselors. Some of them are, like Hanjoon, went to top schools, and some of them are former admissions officers with 15, 20 years experience in the industry. And so it's definitely true. We see a lot of people, trying to game the system for sure, coming up with a fake passion. I think the answer to that is, it's really, if it's obvious to a college counselor, it's definitely obvious to the admissions office, right? Which is why, just following a formula without doing the introspection that Hanjun mentioned won't get you in, right? So it's definitely about thinking about who you really are and what you're passionate about and what actually makes you a strong candidate. So that's definitely a great concern to bring up. Hanjun, any thoughts about that?
Yeah. So I understand like where these college counselors are coming from about creating some kind of passion projects. I think it can definitely be a route that can be taken if like your school doesn't offer enough opportunities. I do agree that sometimes it feels like a little fake depending on what the project is. But I also understand that some students might be attending a school that doesn't have that many opportunities for like leadership or or extracurriculars like in their area of interest. And in that case, you kind of do have to think outside of the box where you have to create those opportunities. So it's definitely like a route that can be taken and for some students. But for me personally, I think I found all the opportunities I needed just around my school and around the area.
Absolutely. Cool. So let's come back to CS and applying for programs related to that. We have a question from someone who asks, I'm from Seattle. I'm a rising senior interested in majoring in computer science. When it comes to writing your essays and activities list, is it best to keep the activities diverse, or should it be CS / STEM based? Is it quote unquote bad to show that you are too STEM focused?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough question. I think the answer is yes, that there is a certain level where if your entire application is STEM, unless you're like very top of the top, it might be a little bad. Like for me, I wanted to make sure that even so most colleges will ask for like an essay and like some short answers or like a couple essays. Just the rule is that for those essays, you don't want to talk about the same things generally. You want to be talking about different things. These people want to see that you are like a person that has like diverse interests, not just a coding robot. So I would say yes to a certain extent. But if you're like if you are like really just passionate, you're like you've already worked at like companies, like this is like your life, definitely highlight it, but definitely throw in some other things to kind of make you more relatable.
Absolutely. There should be 10 spots for the Common App, unless they're changing that this year. The first 3 that you write are definitely the most important. And so if you're super passionate about CS, if your most impressive extracurriculars are related to CS, I would definitely put those as the first 3. But, if you were involved in sports like Hanjoon was, or in music, I don't think that you should exclude that just because it's not related to your major. So really, really wonderful question. kind of related to that, there's another question of, can you have too many ECs?
Yeah, the answer is yes. If you have 20 ECs, I would say that's too much. Like nobody has time to do 20 ECs, or if they do, it's at a very shallow level of interest. So what I like to tell my students is that you want to make sure these ECs that you include, most of them you've done for all 4 years of high school. You've shown a certain level of commitment and a certain level of excellence. So I played cello in high school, and I wasn't like an amazing cellist, but I was good enough to make like the state symphony. So like I would go, or like the Phoenix Youth Symphony. So like I would play for the Phoenix Youth Symphony. I would play for our school orchestra, and make sure that that they know that, hey, I am a cellist. I'm not the best in the world. I'm not the best in the nation, but I am a darn good cellist, and I put a lot of time and passion into that. And this kind of goes through for most of my extracurriculars, where like I put enough time and commitment to them where I can probably say that I do this activity, but it's not to a point where like I'm not the best, but it's not also, the commitment isn't shallow enough where I'm like, oh, I do this like once a month and I just kind of throw it on there.
Yep, absolutely. There's a colleague of ours at Empowerly who's a former admissions officer actually at Stanford and UC Berkeley and U Chicago. So I definitely learn a lot from him. He has 15 years experience in the industry, and he likes to say that in admissions, they have what they call the principle of rarity, right? So if someone's doing something really not unique, but rare in the sense that it might be really specialized, right? If someone says like, oh, I'm interested in biology, there's thousands of students who are interested in biology. But if there's someone who says, I'm insane about bugs, I know everything about flies and spiders, right? That's super weird and interesting because it's rare. And so when you're choosing extracurriculars, right, like thinking about what makes you rare, right? The person who can do a little bit of everything is just, there's a dime a dozen of jack of all trades, right? But the person who really tailors their time and thinks about what they're really passionate about is definitely a lot more impressive, just to back up what Hanjoon was talking about. Another really great question I think will be helpful for juniors and seniors. One of our attendees asks, what do you think is the most ideal way to research colleges? Are there websites that you highly recommend, or any methods like spreadsheets, journals, keeping a large whiteboard?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of online resources available to you. So Empowerly has a database of a bunch of schools, not just like the top 100, top 50 liberal arts colleges, but not liberal arts, just liberal colleges, right?
Yeah.
So Empowerly is one of them. Let's see. US News is always good. We had a bunch of books at my house. It's like a big book of colleges. So those are available as well, and you can kind of like go through it. But yeah, I mean, the information is definitely out there. It's like widely available if you just look. So US News is like the most touted one, and they've expanded where they have like a top list of like different categories. They have a top list of like small schools, like top list of like medium-sized schools, top list of like biology schools. They really expanded on that, and I've always thought that was very useful, even though like some people take the US News rankings a little too seriously. Just aside from the rankings, I think it's like a very valuable wealth of information.
Absolutely. And kind of to piggyback off of that, I guess there's two types of researching colleges. There's researching just generally what are the best schools to apply to. And in that case, I would definitely go to like US News will give you a sense of like what are the so-called best schools, right? And then, the Empowerly platform, we also have done a ton of research. We have a whole research team that just pulls together resources about specific schools. But then, if you are a rising high school senior, one of the essays that you will definitely write is, why do you want to go to our school? right? And that essay actually requires a ton of research. And in terms of how to go about that, I actually think the best way to do that is to actually talk to people who went to the school. I always tell my students to talk to, a couple of students, because just one, Hanjoon's experience is not necessarily everyone's experience at Stanford or my experience at Berkeley. But talking to us can really help you save time, because we can tell you the kinds of things that the Stanford community really values, right? Like at UC Berkeley, I can say that the legal studies department really values people who are like have interest in social justice, for example, and thinking about how current events tie to historical events, right? So that would be my suggestion and stuff to talk about in your essay. So my recommendation is actually less websites and more go out and network and talk to your college counselor and see if they can connect you to anybody who went to that school. It's a great question. Another really great question. Someone asks, I know I want to major in STEM, but I don't know the exact major yet. Is it bad to apply not decided? I know some schools have supplemental essays asking why you want to major. So Hanjoon, I know you mentioned that, Harvard, Yale, such and such don't actually ask you to choose a specific major, but what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, so the top schools, it's not even a problem, because they don't even ask you for your they might ask you for like what you're interested in, but they don't really take it into account of like the application. Certain schools though, like the UCs, you are applying to like the certain they have like a different application process, or like a certain school that you're applying to within the school. So in that case, it might be it's really case by case. But so I know they've been cracking down on students applying as like undecided or something else, and then trying to switch into CS just because like the other process was easier. They've been trying to crack down on that. So like transferring after you got into schools, transferring majors have gotten a lot harder at certain schools. So at that point, what I would do is I would look at kind of the school list that you're interested in and do individual research on those schools. Basically though, top schools, not a problem. For like, just below that, it depends on the school.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to talk about that, I mean, Stanford, it doesn't matter, but just across the pond, I mean, Berkeley, it definitely matters a lot. I was accepted into bioengineering, which I think had a 5% acceptance rate the year that I applied. If I had chosen biology, that has like a 15% acceptance rate, right? So that can really affect your chances. And then if I wanted to, I took so long to leave bioengineering because it's way easier to leave bioengineering than it is to get back in. It's basically impossible to transfer in. So, I think the best answer to this is you really have to do the research on each individual school. Some schools it matters, some schools it doesn't matter at all. So really great questions. Let's do a Stanford specific question. Someone asks, I know Stanford has a symbolic systems as a major, and it seems appealing. Can you elaborate more on what this major is?
Yeah. So I can't go too in depth on SimSys because I didn't major in it myself. But I have a couple friends who did. To my knowledge, they take mostly CS courses as well. They take a lot of CS courses, but then they have other courses to kind of balance it out. But sorry, yeah, I can't give you too much more besides that. I don't know too much about it myself. But yeah, it's a very common. It's a common major. It's people love it.
Yeah, and I would say, if you are interested in that, and if we don't get to your question, I'll take maybe two more and then we'll wrap up for today. But if we don't get to your question, feel free to email us. Our email is enrollment@empowerly.com. But cool. Let's keep going with some CS related questions.
I can also answer the first one. I can answer the
Yes.
STEM magnet one. Yeah. I went to a similar school for high school. I went to a charter school. So it's like a charter public school, which is kind of, to my knowledge, is very similar to magnet. I would say the expectations are pretty similar. I guess because you're coming from like a school that has like maybe like a more concentrated level of students who are interested in STEM, there might be more competition within the school, but the expectations are going to be very, very similar. They're not going to treat you differently. You still have to excel in that school. If a lot of people from that school like really love STEM, like that's fine. They understand that. So I wouldn't like think too much about attending a magnet school kind of affecting your application in a negative or positive way.
Absolutely. And let's come to the last one, just since we are at CodeDay Labs and wrapping up on CS. Hanjoon, what's the difference between applying for CS or computer engineering there's so many different things that sound like the same thing, but what are they?
To be honest, I do not know. So Stanford doesn't have a computer engineering major. So I personally, it's just all CS. I do know that there's some other schools have the two majors as separate things. I remember like hearing certain kind of distinction between them, but I don't feel like comfortable enough saying the difference here and it being applicable to every college. So I'll leave it at that.
And I will say it does kind of go to, it is different at every school. So I'll speak to Berkeley because we do have a difference. So we have the EECS major, EECS, which is in the College of Engineering. And then we have the CS major, which is in the College of Letters and Sciences. And now we have so many other related majors like data science and stuff like that are also, programming type majors. The big difference, a lot of it has to do with, so CS is a lot more of a general studies, like you take a lot more general ed classes, whereas EECS students just take STEM classes and they only take a handful of humanities courses. So EECS is a lot more hardcore. And then even within EECS, though, there's like a lot of differentiations between like the people who are in like, now I'm speaking as someone who left engineering, so I'm just throwing out technical terms that I heard a lot, but there's like the people who are more into hardware as opposed to software, the people, and then there's, overlap between other majors, right? The people who did EE, but did a lot of research in the bioengineering department. So kind of the difference between those two majors, it really depends on how each school's department defines that. So that's something to research as you're writing your Y school essays. So great question. Okay, well, we went a little bit over the time that I was expecting, but I hope this was helpful for all of you guys. If you have any questions, like I said, feel free to email us at enrollment@empowerly.com, and you can also call or text us at 1-800-491-6920. And yeah, if you're interested in college counseling, that's what we do. So feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much to both of you, Sarah and Hanjoon, for all of your work, all of your answers, and all of your help on this topic. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. It was an honor to have you guys.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
And for the unanswered questions, I'm answering them right now in chat. So no worries.
We have like 7 minutes more if you guys would like to answer more if you have time, but if you don't, that's completely okay too.
I can definitely. So let me finish this real quick and then
someone asked if the presentation will be shared.
Yeah, that is not a problem.
Cool.
Alper, I'm not sure if you are sharing the recording, but I can also email you this this presentation.
Yeah, so I'll have like an additional resources link on the description of the recording. So if you guys could email that to me, that'd be great. I'll put it there.
Absolutely.
Great. So Hanjoon, if you'd like to answer more questions, that's okay. But if you don't have time, I completely understand too.
Yeah, no, I'll answer the last two
Great.
before I head out. Yeah. So for the how do you balance it between being well-rounded and having a focus in our application? So this was an issue I had myself. I kind of sit down halfway through my high school career, maybe my sophomore summer or like early junior year, and kind of think about like what the strongest part of my application is. So it's great that you're like well-rounded. So like make sure you're well-rounded. But then at a certain point, you have to kind of think about, okay, I'm well-rounded, but I'm probably the strongest in this one area. And basically that strong area you want to focus on in the latter half of your high school career and make sure that is the focus in your application. For me, that was math, and it kind of came naturally just because I was able to attend a school that offered higher level math courses after calculus. I was able to take a bunch of them, and that kind of became my focus. I ended up going to a math summer camp. I went to SUMaC, which is Stanford Math Camp, my junior summer. So that kind of became my main focus, along with everything else kind of revolving around it. And then, is it wise to recycle essays between applications? Yes, you can. You can recycle essays between applications. Make sure it's not the essay saying, why do you want to come to this school? Like, don't recycle that one. That one's like super obvious. But yeah, like if the two prompts are like similar, it's definitely possible to recycle it. Just make sure you put in like enough effort where it feels like it's personalized to that difference in the prompt. And yeah, you should be good to go. But yeah, just don't recycle it for the why Columbia. Like, don't recycle that for like, I don't know, UPenn. I don't know. It's bad. And it's obvious. Yeah,
I
thank you guys
believe
so
that's
much.
all. Thank you so much for answering those last two questions. And thank you again to both of you for spending all this time with us and during this presentation.
Yep.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.